right, 6 o'clock on the money, 1800 Mountain. Got Jay closed the stream, but I'm assuming he'll be back.
Hey John, yeah, I'm here. Whenever you're ready to go, I'm just on the helicopter training videos login.
Got it. I see you there. Awesome. Yeah, well, I am recording, so we might as well get her going. If people jump in throughout the study group, that'll be great. But this will be recorded and sent to Jay, and he's going to post it eventually. So, but I'll get started. My name's John LeDrew, founder of the Helicopter Pilot Study Group. We meet weekly, generally Thursdays or Fridays, and this is a platform for pilots of all skill levels, from private and beyond, that want to pick a topic from the task from the ACS, or just a topic in general, and have an opportunity and a platform to present about it, to work on our presenting skills, and then talk about it as a group in a study group session. We can have multiple presentations, or we can have special presentations like we have today. Jay from Leading Edge and Helicopter Training Videos is going to present today to us about some summertime things to consider. And this is something I'm really looking forward to, especially being at a high DA pilot here in Colorado. And Jay certainly has the same experience out in the eastern part of Oregon, some high DAs out there. So with that, Jay, I'll let you take it from there, and I'll share your screen when you start your stream, and we'll let you fire it up. Thanks to everybody who's here today too. We got a lot of new faces, so that's pretty exciting, or a lot of new squares or rectangles, I guess. But yeah, it's great. Glad everybody's here, and we are. Yeah, you're up, brother. I'm gonna mute myself and let you take it over. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All
Okay,
right.
You guys can all see the summer operations screen.
Yep, I have it
Hopefully.
front and center here.
Big blue rectangle.
Yep, I have it front and
Yeah, you got
center.
it.
Yep.
Excellent. So yeah, my name's Jay Bunning. I work for Leading Edge. My thoughts and opinions today are, as very proud as I am to work with Leading Edge, these are going to be my own. I'm also an FAA safety team rep, and that's why you can get wings credit for attending this webinar. At the end of the discussion, I'll put all the links, including a link to a survey where you can then put some feedback for the webinar, but also claim your wings credits, the FAA wings credits. So a little bit of an introduction. We'll go through, why it's important, and then we'll dive straight into pre-flight and planning, startup and run-up, and then really get into the meat of it, which is the flight operations, order rotations, and other maneuvers off airports, etc. A little bit about cool down post-flight. And like I said, at the very end, there'll be links and time for questions and discussion, etc. There's a lot to go through, so if you could, let's try and do the questions at the end. So if you can just take notes as we go along, and we'll go from there. Okay. Obviously, longer days and higher temps mean increased risks. We're talking about reduced aircraft performance, faster RPM changes, increased traffic, wildfire activity, fatigue, and more. I'm going to be talking about general stuff, but also some specifics about the R-22 Beta 2 and the Raven 2. And I'm also going to be talking about some of the large temperature swings that happen in places like Bend, Oregon. But, take what you can and apply, and we can always discuss the differences at the end. Like I said, Bend, where I'm based, the standard temperature on a standard day is about 7 degrees centigrade. We're 3,500 feet above sea level. We get pretty good swing. We get a full set of seasons. So in this winter, we'll get down easily to -5, if not colder. And in the summer, it is certainly not uncommon for us to see days above 30 degrees centigrade. In 2021, I think one of the highest temperatures we saw was in the low 40s. At that point, we are not flying. That is hot. Average density altitudes at the airport, in the winter, we get down to about 2,000. In the summer, it's in height of summer, it's not too uncommon for us to go above 7,000 DA, and that makes some of these maneuvers particularly challenging, and in some cases just not a good idea at all. And we'll get into all the specifics. So, as I said, I work for Leading Edge Flight Academy here, help run the school, and I created these summer and winter ops handouts for our internal training for our instructors and for our students. And so a lot of this content actually I've stolen back from when I created these, but made it for more of a general audience. So first, let's get into pre-flight planning performance. When we are doing our hover out ground effect checks on the pre-flight planning, when we see that we have out of ground effect hover performance below our takeoff and landing elevation, we got to be really careful, of course, in what we do. And there's certain maneuvers which we'll talk about later where it may not be a good idea, or we should modify those maneuvers when we are unable to maintain an out of ground effect hover on paper, at least at the start of the flight. I tell students and instructors, I see a lot of people write on their hands of the manifold pressure limits and things like that. But I'd say the one thing that is most important is your hover out ground effect performance. Limits, etc., you can look up in flight. It's a little bit trickier to pull out the POH and this chart in flight. All right, back to it. I would also suggest if you are experiencing conditions where your out-of-ground effect performance is going to be below your expected takeoff and landing area, to calculate your out-of-ground effect performance after 30 minutes of fuel burn. So we typically think of the R-22's single tank looking a bit like a 100-minute gauge if you work the math out, about 9 to 10 gallons per hour, 16.9 gallons. That works out to about 101 minutes of fuel on board. So you can sort of use the gauge as a 100-minute gauge, just rough, rule of thumb. And you're burning somewhere between 9 to 10, so close to about a pound a minute. But if you look at the difference in the chart, if you started at max gross weight and you're on a 30-degree day, on the previous slide, you'd see that would be 3,000 feet. After 30 minutes of fuel burn, a pretty aggressive burn of about 10 gallons per hour, you will be on 30 pounds, which swings you all the way up to about 5,000 feet. So you're gaining over 2,000 feet in performance in just burning off that 30 pounds of fuel. Now, that only really works for the first half of this chart. Once you start getting to the knee, you can see it flattens out. So it's only really applicable to the higher weights. Another thing to consider in your pre-flight planning when those temperatures really get up there is the demonstrated operating temperature of the engine under the performance section. This is the R22. Satisfactory engine cooling has been demonstrated an outside air temperature of 38 at sea level or 23 above ISA. So at bend, we're 7 degrees is our standard temperature adjusted for the elevation. So once you get 30 degrees and above, the performance data, we don't know how well that performance data stands up once you start getting to those higher temperatures. And as it says here, caution, performance data presented in this section was obtained under ideal conditions. I would say just from personal experience, once we start getting 30 and above, we are not seeing performance close to the paper performance. I always say there's paper performance, which is what you're using on your pre-flight planning, and then there's real performance. You should always build a buffer, but I think that when you get to these kind of temperatures, you should add even more caution to that expected performance. Another real important one is the carb heat. Now, as we get into the deep summer, we're outside of that temperature range, but there's many days where we'll get afternoon thunderstorms coming in, and now we are creeping into carb icing conditions, even though temperatures are quite high. And that, as we know from the performance section of the POH, it talks about reducing hover ceilings by up to 2,000 feet. I would take that seriously. I really would. Over the 16 years or so that I've been flying, some of the closest calls I've been witness to or heard of have been in R-22s using carb heat. That's where they'll get themselves into trouble, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the big things is that we know from the safety notice that we can pull an extra 1.5 inches of manifold pressure when we're using carb. And we talked about this last week with Richard when we were talking about carb icing. The trouble is that that doesn't mean that it's automatically there, that you may assume that you can just add that extra 1.5 inch to the manifold pressure limits. You may hit full throttle, and that's going to get you into some serious trouble if we don't plan that. So here's a little excerpt from our run-up checklist. One of the things we do is we verbalize the manifold pressure limits for the day, where the expected full throttle is, and what our hovering out of ground effect performance is. And we have this is the Robinson checklist version that we've slightly adjusted. You can see the Robinson line there we've lined through, and we've added a more conservative red line. That's based on testing that we did across the entire fleet. We're not running brand new engines, brand new aircraft, all those performance charts, no matter who the manufacturer is, almost like a sales pitch, right, for the aircraft. So don't bet your life on being able to meet those lines. So we added a conservative adjustment to where we suspect the full throttle to be. And for the times that in the last couple of years since we've been using this, a couple of times that we've had instances where people have got full throttle, it has correlated pretty much on that line. So that's a good conservative way of thinking. But if you don't plan for where you're going to hit full throttle, you're going to get a nasty surprise when you're pulling that collective on short final, right? If you work for a flight school or you're training through a flight school, I'm sure they have some sort of limitations. We have certain limitations on solo students that they're required to have out of ground hover performance plus a 500-foot buffer for their expected airport landings on their cross countries, and that we cut off solo operations if the DA gets above 6,000 feet at the expected airport elevations. We also have separate auto rotation limits and modifications, which we'll get into when we get into the auto rotation stuff. Personal limits. What is your personal limits? Do you have, and we'll talk about this in the discussion at the end, what is the DA that you're not comfortable doing certain maneuvers or perhaps even flying? Another thing that comes certainly out west is wildfires. So as we go into the summer season, it's already sort of starting to happen here, but we've got smoke jumper base nearby. They're doing a lot of training. And then as the active fires kick in, so making sure that we're using that, if you use ForeFlight, you're using that NOTAM and TFR layer. If you have avionics that allow ADS-B in, you can select TFRs and NOTAMs to be displayed, and then TFRs will display visually. And then using VFR flight following, having Seattle Center or whatever your facility is to notify you on the fly if something pops up. Here you can just see a couple of images from ForeFlight. Here's a TFR for firefighting. And then here is a NOTAM for smoke jumper operations. And in this area, they'll be ramping up their training pretty aggressively in the next, they'll probably peak about a week or two from now, and then they'll be more into the actual working on fires. One thing to think about when you do see a TFR is not just avoiding the TFR, but to be thinking about, all right, that traffic is working the area, working the TFR. Now, when they need to come back for fuel and retardant, where are they going to go? Think about their routes. Often they're moving very low and fast. They may not be on the frequency that you're expecting to be on. They may not be aware of your local practice areas or any procedures. Every summer, you have a lot of fire action going on in Central Oregon. And I think it was last summer, a tanker racing back from a fire, trying to get back into the tanker base at Redmond, had a pretty serious near miss with an airliner coming into Redmond. So it's not just the small GA stuff, even the big aircraft, somehow they missed each other visually, and luckily they obviously didn't touch metal. But so think about the routes, not just the routes in and out. Another big part of it, of course, is wildfire smoke. I would say this is one of the problems with this is it is very variable over very short distances. I remember conditions look very similar to what you see here, and I flew probably about 10 miles or less south of the airport, and as I went over a hill, the visibility went straight down, and luckily I had time to turn back along the ridge, but it was just kind of sitting in there. It acts a little bit differently than fog and mist, so it's a little bit harder to forecast and predict. And even changing your altitude or direction within a sort of a pretty small area can affect what you see as you kind of descend into layers, or if you turn and the sun affecting the particles can change your visibility considerably. There are products out there. If you go to weather.gov/fire, they do have smoke forecast tools that are getting better and better. But if conditions are questionable, stay close to your base. Be ready to use special VFR. Do you know who you're going to speak to? How that goes? When was the last time you practiced IMC procedures? But above all, remember you're a helicopter. Land and live. Put it down. If you're not already aware, VAI has a land and live initiative that they started probably over 10 years ago now. There's a link to that. I'll put all the links again in the chat at the end. But yeah, we're helicopters. Let's just land if things are getting bad. Flight planning personal. Sunscreen, UV blocking shirts. If you're out working in a helicopter most of the day, especially instructors, pilots are twice as likely to get skin cancer than the average person. We're out in that exposure quite a lot. Make sure you drink water. I flew for Papillon for a little while, and temperatures were even more aggressive there, obviously, in the canyon, and you just couldn't drink enough water. And they provided electrolyte tablets and powder to try and help you deal with the headaches and everything else. But always remember to pack extra water on a cross-country flight for those unplanned precautionary landings, etc. Do you have enough water to at least be comfortable? And I'm safe. Heat fatigue. It is very much a real thing. Those of you that have flown in it, I'm sure you're very much aware of how exhausting it can be. Put that on top of that, some wildfire smoke into your eyes, your throat, and it's not a great time to be out flying. Personal hygiene. So if you are working as a crew or as a student and as an instructor, especially an instructor who's working back-to-back flights, making sure that you're maybe wearing an undershirt instead of just wearing the same polyester t-shirt or polo every day. It can be a bit uncomfortable to have to sit next to someone smelling of BO for an hour and a half. Pre-flight checks. So we always see as we get these big temperature fluctuations in Oregon, we see as we go into the hotter months, we see certain things pretty regularly. One thing would be blade boots leaking. One thing to be watching out for, teletemps increase if they hadn't already gone through a summer. Oil pressure relief valve, so often we'll see higher oil pressure and higher temperatures. Idles being different. I have a little plug here for the foundonpreflight.com website. If you're not already aware of that, that's a sort of volunteer project I've been collecting from pilots over the years and myself of various aircraft. So check that out for things to be looking out for, or if you've got some stuff found on pre-flight, please put that in there. Engine cooling. So our engine cooling becomes much more critical as we get into those higher temperatures. Making sure that oil cooler is clear of dust. If it's not, get maintenance to blow it out. They'll put compressed air in there. If it's caked full of dust, it's not such a big problem through the winter, but it is going to be a problem as we go into the summer. Engine sheet metal condition. If you've got gaps or cracks in the sheet metal around the engine, that's another problem that will cause higher temperatures, of course. Bugs. So the front vent, as we go into the warmer temperatures, you're going to start using that front vent. Make sure it's clear. I had a in-flight emergency, I would call it, where we hadn't used the vent, and I opened the vent, and a wasp, a pretty big wasp, had been thinking about hanging out in there, came into the cockpit, and the two of us were kind of passing the flight controls back rather frantically, trying to deal with this thing. And I'm seriously thinking about landing it on the downwind because it was a pretty scary moment trying to fight this wasp off whilst trying to keep control of the aircraft. It's a big distraction. Windshields. Yeah, I mean, windshields being clean. It's not. It's a safety of flight thing. When you start having windshields with a lot of specks on, you start misidentifying the specks as traffic, or you start missing the opportunity to see the traffic because your eyes are focusing closer than they should be because of these specks on the windshield. So yeah, make sure you're keeping the windshields clean and don't know to be going up and down, not left to right. If we go up and down and we do catch a little scratch on it, it's not so bad. But if we go left and right, start putting scratches on the canopy or the windshield that are horizontal, supposedly makes it harder to see wires. Right? Make sure you have some clean supplies on board. Doors off operations. We all know Robinson authorizes both doors to be off. This is from the limitations section. Either or both cabin doors can be removed. Loose items in the cabin must be properly secured during doors off flight. They do pretty strongly recommend keeping the left door on, and I do too, actually. And here's the normal procedures. Avoid removing left door to protect the tail rotor from loose objects. And then here's the safety notice, again, even stronger here, never fly with the left door removed. There have been a few accidents where things have gone out that left side and gone down through the tail rotor. So it's tail rotor safety. I think there's a few other pieces going on as well. I do fly with a knee board quite often, and if I have any paper that's secured on a knee board, it's a bit of a distraction trying to manage the paper, but it's also the radio and intercom audio interference. When you have both doors off, it creates quite an airflow. And if you wear noise canceling headphones, it will mess with that noise canceling and makes them a lot less effective. I had an instructor who had just got a set of noise canceling headphones, and they told me they were getting headaches at the end of the day, and they were flying with both doors off. Once they went to a David Clark, or if they put left door on, they stopped. It's because the noise canceling just doesn't work if it keeps getting this buffeting interference of the airflow. I've also had people miss radio calls, again, that they blamed on just couldn't hear as well with both doors off. Is it really worth it? Just once you're at forward flight, if you've got that one door off and you got the other one with the vent open, you get a pretty good movement of air. Now, if I was doing a lot of hover work, I would consider having both doors off, or if for some reason we needed a door off for photography work, etc., obviously there's a time for all of that. And then always secure cockpit and personal items. I treat the aircraft, whether it's a 2244 or anything else, like one of the doors is going to come open at the most inconvenient time, and is that cabin secure for that sudden change in airflow? And if you aren't comfortable flying, if the way you have the aircraft set up, you're not comfortable flying with the door open or off, then you need to secure it, because there's a good chance that door may pop open in flight. And then, of course, if you are taking the doors off and on, depending on your FSDO rules, they may have to use an aircraft log, or something we have to be tracking when doors are on and off, who put them on and off, and only certain people are allowed to put them on and off. Those have been trained, and we have to track for that for the log as well for weight and balance. But with these doors going on and off, we have the opportunity to screw it up a little bit with these pins. So you see all sorts of variations of these pins in the doors. The correct way for the manufacturer is that the pin faces this direction, so the airflow and the direction of the actual aircraft are moving the pin into and not out of the hole. And then we just want to bend one leg at 45 degrees. If we bend it more than that, or we start bending both legs, you're going to start metal fatigue or even more metal fatigue on the pin. There's a good chance it'll break. So just one leg at 45 degrees. You have to bend these things around. We're going to talk about some R44 specifics real quick, Raven 2 specifics. The R44 Raven 2 always seems to be troublesome for people to start, at least in our flight school. I tried to give what I asked people to do, and me personally, have not had a problem starting it. But one thing you might hear is, you don't need to prime it because it's warm. Well, it is a fuel-injected engine. You need to prime it to get fuel into the cylinders. So you should be priming it even when it's warm. And again, you might have your own personal take on this. This is just kind of what works for me, and sort of following more of the manufacturer's guidance again. Obviously, always be careful not to overprime, especially if it's not the first attempt. And if you think you have overprimed, have a look under the aircraft. I had an instructor having trouble start, and they called me over. And as I walked over, I could see fuel just dripping under the aircraft. Now, if that's the case, shut everything down, turn the battery off, go in and drink some water, because you got to wait for that to stop leaking, right? It's not going to start. And if it does ignite that extra fuel, when was the last time you went through the engine fire and startup BP? So you are putting yourself at risk with all the extra fuel on the fuel floor there. And never, ever, ever crack the throttle to open on startup attempt. just a slight crack on these engines when there's no load on them will almost instantly cause an engine overspeed or a misalignment of the cooling fan. We've had it happen on 22s and 44s, people thinking that they're just going to give it a little bit of gas before they turn the key. Don't do it. Wait till it's started before you add any movement of the throttle. And then here you can just sort of see the normal procedures, talks about priming. It doesn't, unfortunately, on this checklist, it doesn't actually talk about how much to prime. But then when you get to the starting tips, it talks about prime 3 to 5 seconds, engine fires momentary, etc. And it talks about kind of a slightly different technique. I'm not going to read you the POH. I'm sure you know how to do that. This is an excerpt from an updated R44 checklist that I created for our flight school. And so we put in some of the numbers to have it on hand, like the prime time, as well as how many attempts, because we need to be careful of starter motor, which we'll talk about in a second. If you have one of these aircraft, especially these 44s, where the belts are too tight, and so as soon as you're turning the starter, it's turning the blades, that puts a lot of stress, and it's a lot harder to get the engine started that way. But if you do have something set like that, obviously, if it doesn't start the first time, do not stop those blades. Give it a second, reset, reprime if necessary, and start while you still have some momentum in the blades. And let your maintenance facility know, because that is putting extra demand on the starter motor, which we have blowing up at least one starter motor in an R44. It's just getting too hot trying to start these things, which goes to the start limits. 5 to 7 seconds, 3 attempts, and then a 10-minute cool down. Also, in the height of summer, if there's any concern that it's still possibly going to be hot, we'll get them to just really carefully, because you will burn yourself, just touch that starter motor out just to see if it has cooled down. And then there's the kind of extreme version of the R44 vapor lock, where the fuel is vaporizing in the fuel lines. That's going to make it very, very, very hard, if not impossible, to start. So then we follow the procedure of mixture all the way out, run the prime for 30 seconds. That brings fresh fuel from the fuel tank, cooler fuel through the fuel lines, and helps with that. And then we go back into a normal start sequence, which is prime if necessary, and go on from there. Carb heat checks. Back to the R22 now, or Raven 1, I suppose. Even when not in carb icing conditions or in the height of summer, don't skip the carb heat checks. There's a few reasons I would say. First is carb ice can occur in unexpected conditions. So you get the summer afternoon thunderstorms or rain showers. If you're hitting rain on the windshield, there's a very, very good chance there's enough humidity to be in carb icing conditions, of course. Or if you operate near lakes or rivers or other bodies of water, or landing on grass that's been irrigated, been sprinkled. The other thing is that consistent checks reinforce good habits and reduce the chance of you forgetting or skipping that check in the future. Now, of course, we should be using the checklist, of course, right? But just stay consistent. It also verifies that the carb heat valve is not stuck open, which would severely affect your performance. If you actually see, if you move the carb heat and you see a change in temperature and hear a change in RPMs, and you know that you've increased carb heat and you've reduced carb heat. So the valve is opening and closing. Winds. So summer winds, the summer thermals often create variable and gusty wind conditions. So making sure we're always checking windsocks on downwind and final in any time, but especially in these type of conditions. And I always preach that you should know in a helicopter, you should know what the wind conditions are, whether it's an airport or not, before you go below ETL. And those 30-knot checks, well, I call them 30-knot checks, we already check on an approach. We're already most of us know that we don't go below 30 knots if we have greater than 300 feet per minute. So we're already trained to pay attention as we approach 30 knots for the descent rate. And I'd say add some more little things to your list on that 30-knot list. LTE, where does LTE happen? Below 30 knots, right? How much of a descent, how much more of a decrease in airspeed before we start getting a massive change in performance? As we start going through ETL, we're going to really need a lot more power. We really need to know how much power are we pulling as we go slower and slower past 30, where the winds are coming from. And this is the time to decide if you want to continue into that confined area, or you want to continue with that suspected tailwind. I recommend trying to use that 30 knot, not just for descent rate, but to consider winds, power, and go around opportunities. Often, in the summer, your solo operations are going to be when winds are, depends on your school policy, but I think ours is 12 knots or less, 8 knots or less for the initial solo. So those are light and variable winds. And in the summer, because of this convective activity, because of these thermals, that's often when you're going to get these winds that may shift windsock around. And if you've got multiple windsocks on the airfield, you may see one is one way, one's another way, and on the downwind, it may have shifted again. So student solo flights are more likely to kind of get caught out by this because the winds are light and variable. If the winds were stronger, they probably wouldn't be flying solo anyway. And that's the later on in their training. Another one we see a lot of are dust devils. Looking out for that dust column and the debris, even the shadow of it. And obviously make sure you stay well away from these and announce the hazard on CTAF or tower frequency. Don't underestimate these. These have been attributed to at least 170 accidents. The NTSB has an article and a video, which again I'll put links to. The great thing about summer is, it's good conditions to fly. The downside to that is the airports get a little bit busier, the airspace gets a little bit busier, more traffic conflicts. We track traffic incidents or traffic conflicts through our safety management system. And every year, as we go into the warmer months, those numbers obviously start picking up. Some of the people that you'll see, or we call fair weather pilots, you may be flying aircraft that are not equipped with ADS-B or even radios. And we also get a lot more people doing cross countries and pilots coming in that may be unfamiliar with your local procedures. Every year it seems we'll have someone an airplane that tries to join the helicopter pattern, or even fly the opposite direction to the helicopters on that side. Aircraft and equipment limits. So we pay a lot more attention to our temperatures and pressures. We should always be paying attention to this, but as soon as we go into those warmer months, expect reduced performance margins. We'll talk about that a little bit more in some specifics in a minute. iPads. I'm sure those of you that have flown through the warmer months with an iPad have seen that warning before. Make sure you've got paper backups of required plates or charts or details that you need to go into airports. We've had more than one on a check ride end up having an iPad failure. So the governor, again, we're talking about Robinson specific here for a second, the R22 and R44. The high DA has an effect on the governor for sure, and Robinson talk about it in their systems description. About 4,000 feet, throttle collective, correlation and governor are less effective, therefore power changes should be slow and smooth. I'd argue they should always be slow and smooth, but things are made worse through these higher temperatures and high DA. Avoid large pedal inputs and abrupt collective movements. Use extra caution when lowering collective from high power settings. That we do see, and we'll talk a little bit more about the R44 in particular, where we are a very high power setting and a student or a pilot lowers the collective aggressively for a reason, and it will cause an overspeed. It won't back off quick enough. Rapid collective increases during pickups can cause an overspeed. When you have the collective all the way down, and as you come up, next time you're flying an R22, it's certainly possible in the 44 as well, but the 22 is really easy to feel this. And the collective's fully down, start raising the collective governor on. And as you raise the collective, you will feel, if you pay attention, you'll feel the throttle closing. The governor is trying to maintain the RPM and avoid an overspeed. And you can really feel that as you raise the collective up. Now, if you go too fast, it won't have time to do that, and you will get potentially an overspeed on pickup. And as always, slow, smooth control inputs. We'll talk about autos in a second, but the end of an auto, as we expect the governor to bring the RPMs from 80% and up, especially in the aircraft like a 44, where there's a lot more movement of metal and a lot more energy there, it can certainly be a lot slower to come up. So, okay, I want to talk real quickly about this R44 overspeed scenario. Unfortunately, we see At least a couple of these every year that I've been tracking it, and although they don't always end up with a tear down of the engine or anything like that, they are exceeding limitations, and we have to deal with it. So here's the kind of scenario: you've got an R44 Raven 2. You're pulling an extra 2.8 inches for takeoff or from climb out on a missed approach if you're doing instrument training. It's high DA in the summer. The student sees that they're about to exceed their assigned altitude if they're doing instrument training, and they dump the collective down to stop the descent, to stop the climb, which immediately reduces the amount of drag in the rotor system and unloads that 200 and whatever it is, 35 brake horsepower. And engine and the governor just cannot back off quick enough. And we don't have a lot of room in the R44. You know, the red line there is closer than it is in the R22, and we do have a maximum of 105 for a transient. So once you get to 106, we're kind of into an overspeed. Right? How do we prevent this type of overspeed? Briefing students who are new to the R44. That's just part of transition training to the R44, some of the differences, and one of it is that it is more susceptible to that, and particularly the Raven 2, where it has this much bigger takeoff power range. Than you have a lot more collective movement from consistent power or continuous power to takeoff power. There's more collective, which means there's more change in the drag as you dump that back down. Is caution, anytime you're in the yellow range, the variable range on an R44 climbing out, I would train the student to pay attention to that. We move slowly out of that range. It's not a bad idea for the 22 as well. If you've got extra passengers, you've got someone sitting in the back, which is a great way to learn instruments as well. Someone else has the stress of wearing the hood of shame, and you're just in the back picking up all the notes. Well, but the extra passenger in the back, or maybe full fuel for a cross country, you're increasing the weight of the aircraft, which means we are more likely to be using a lot more of that takeoff power to climb out, which means that we're more likely to be in that scenario where we have to, where if we do lower the collective too quickly, that we'll get a pinch and overspeed. As an instructor, you should be guarding against that by making sure that you're guarding underneath the collective. You're ready to add some slight roll down pressure on the throttle. Make sure it's just one person doing that. If you and the student think that's a technique, the two of you can give yourself low RPM and gently advise the student there approaching their assigned altitude, so it's not panic. And tips there: slow down. If it's thermal or turbulent air, the less you have, the less speed, the less likely. So if you're climbing out at a lower speed, say 55 to 60, or say 60, you probably don't have to use as much power. You also have less momentum in the airframe, and then we sort of get into the whole low G concerns as well. It's 32 there, talking about 60 to 70 for turbulent air. We've also had an R44 racing back from Northern Oregon on a cross country, and they were in turbulent conditions, and they got themselves loading and unloading in the thermal, and that also gave them a engine overspeed there. So just slow down. About speed, the V&E considerations, some things to think about that you might not be thinking about in the winter with the R44. For example, you're on an instrument training flight, you got a passenger in the back, you got some extra fuel, you're above 2,200 pounds, and you're 8,000 feet MSL on a warm summer's day. It's 30 degrees at bend, which is about 21 degrees up there at altitude. And your V&E is going to be 101, but no, because we're heavy, we're above 2,200. Now we're down to 91. It's pretty easy to get to 90, easily over 90 knots in an R44. And then if you are doing any auto training, any simulated engine failures at altitude, your V&E for the auto is now dropped down all the way down to 71 in those conditions. I always get students to, when they're doing instrument training, is give me the manifold pressure limits and the V&E for takeoff, but also at the highest elevation that we're going to be flying at. And you can see, obviously, sometimes it's quite significant. More R44 specifics, hydraulics off landings. I quite like hydraulics off training, but I understand a lot of people don't. And with high DA and light and variable winds, there certainly is a higher risk here to be considered. Even 5 knots of steady wind can seriously help stabilize the aircraft. make sure in these kind of conditions you're using a wide runway. And I would consider postponing touchdowns of hydraulics off training if the conditions were super high DA and light and variable winds. Okay, auto rotations. Getting to the meat here with the auto rotations. Summer high DA means thinner air, which means that we have a higher true airspeed, the same indicated. And I'll show you some numbers of examples of that in a second. So that means we're going to have a few things, and don't worry, we're not going to get into all the math of this, but we get quicker RPM change. And part of that is because this is a dynamic pressure formula. Again, I'm not going to test on this formula, but I want you to know that this symbol here, rho, is air density. And you can see that dynamic pressures on the airfoil is being affected by the changes in air pressure. We also get longer glides due in part to increased true airspeed, but also the total drag is being reduced. This is a parasite drag again. I don't even know what half of this stuff means, but I do know the rho is air density. And so we'll see with the thinner summer air, we'll see a reduction in parasite drag and profile drag, a slight increase in induced drag as we need a higher angle of attack for the same amount of lift. But as a whole, the total drag is going down. And so, you might see you get a cold morning one day, and then the next day things have picked up in temperatures, the first day of summer, whatever, and your glide seems way off. You're gliding much further. It's not your imagination. The air is thinner. You are going to glide further. So high DA, we need to adjust. Well, we adjust the indicated airspeed to correct for the changes in true airspeed. And I'll show you some examples, and I'll tell you why we do it. So a normal auto entry at Bend would be a minimum of 500 feet above the field, which is 4,000 feet MSL. And on a standard day, that would be, and we do it 60 to 70. A standard day, that would be a standard temperature of 7 degrees. Our true airspeed is about 63 to 74 if we're using the same number range. So you can see about 3 or 4 knots faster than the indicated. Not a huge change. And the reason there is a change, even though it's a standard day, is that we're higher than sea level, right? But nothing too crazy. But if we get to some of the hot days in the summer, and here you can see there's an extreme example where it's 34 degrees, and this is our cutoff for autos. We don't do autos above 7,000 DA as a school. That's kind of our cutoff rule. And at 7,000 DA, so right there at our limit, the true airspeed has now jumped up somewhere between 12 and 18 knots faster than what you are seeing indicated. And we know from back to that dynamic pressure formula, the velocity squared, so velocity is a big deal on performance of the rotor system. We know that from our lift equation and things like that. And also the amount of energy that's coming through the rotor system. So if we go into a flare at 60 to 70 in these summer conditions, we are coming into a flare. What is really our indicators in our era is really about 80 knots of true. And if we try to do the same kind of flare that we did a couple of weeks later when it was more standard temperatures, we're going to have way more energy than we realize, and we're going to get potentially an overspeed. To start with, for a while, when I first came back to the flight school helping out probably about 5 years ago, what they were doing was when the temperatures came up, they would do like a 100-foot mini flare. They would just kind of start the flare a little bit higher, take out some of the energy, and then progress normally further down. And that's not a bad technique. Anytime you have extra energy, extra airspeed, to start to knock some of it off early. But what we found is we brought in this adjustment that if it's above 6,000 DA, instead of entering at 60 to 70 and doing our 200 checks at 60 and 70, we just take 5 knots off the indicated airspeed. So high DA auto operations we conduct at 55 to 65 indicated, which when you run these numbers with the true airspeed calculation, you're pretty much in the ballpark of where you would have been for the rest of the year. So we end up with more consistent sort of energy profiles. We don't have to start adding these what we call baby flares, I think, as a adjustment. Now, every flare is different, of course, and it's just I'm not saying you don't do that. You don't add a bit of a nose up if you've got excess energy, but this is what we found And since we've done this, touch wood, we haven't had any, I don't think we've had any overspeeds that I would say would be directly related to coming with too much energy. Yeah. All right, so let's talk more about auto rotations. So thermals, or convective turbulence, if you want to use the FAA's wording. I think this is an old FAA weather book diagram, but it's actually clearer to me than the new weather books diagram of the same thing. You can see here we have the different types of terrain creating different amounts of uneven heating, which of course leads to these convective turbulence, or thermals as we call them. It can cause rapid RPM decay and build as we load and unload the rotor system. They're usually in a pair. And what I mean by that is if you get a load, you're going to get an unload, or if you get an unload, you'll get load on the other side as you kind of go through the waves through the convective turbulence. So making sure that we use our sensation of feel. If we feel heavy, we don't have to wait for the tach to tell us. We are going to get a build of RPMs, right? I always think with autos, there's 3 stages. You feel the loading and unloading, the lightness and the heaviness in the seat. Then the next thing you'll hear the RPMs build up. And then I think really the tach is kind of the last in the line. And if you're watching the tach, you're not looking outside, try to fly a bit more by feel, really. But also, if it's a small fluctuation, they often self-correct. So don't start chasing every fluctuation from a thermal with the collective, or you're just creating yourself a lot more work, attitude changes and everything else. If it's acceptable and you know that it's probably going to come back, give it a second or two, and if it comes back, great. If it doesn't, well, yeah, maybe you need to make an adjustment. But learning to do auto rotations in summer convective turbulence is terrible. I mean, learning to fly autos in an R20 generally is very, very hard, but throw in these conditions and it's tricky. So if you are a student or instructor, you probably know early morning flights are obviously best before the thermals really kick in for a student trying to learn this. Back to these variable winds, but kind of applied to the auto rotation stuff. So again, making sure, now as an instructor, if you're not the one on the controls, you have a lot more time to be looking around and taking things in. But even as a student, try to take note of that windsock as you're about to enter, or as you're on final, or if you're doing a 180 as part of your scan. Has that windsock shifted on you since you thought this was a good idea? Because if you've got a sudden tailwind, even if it's just a few knots, it's shifting from a headwind to a tailwind, that's going to change what you do. You're going to change the flare profile, or it should change flare profile, or you're going to come down lower and quicker than you're expecting. Talking of that, beware of the dropouts. We get these sudden changes in wind directional strength, and in the glide, they're not so bad. We can work with that. And once we've progressed deep into the flare and we've got the engine involved, again, we can probably deal with that because we can level. It's when we get these dropouts right at this critical moment, typically below 200 feet, but before we've got the engine involved in the flare, and we get these sudden sink outs. And often that would be a good time for the instructor to take the controls and level the aircraft. Because if we're going to make ground contact, and we had one not that long ago, again, we've probably had a couple in the last year of tail taps from dropouts, making sure that if we get the aircraft level, then 2 things. 1, we don't expose the tail and the tail rotor. And 2, if we do touch down, it's a slight run on. It's a full down order that you didn't expect to do that you get to log. But also, as we bring the nose level, if we have got the engine involved at that point, or the engine's coming up, the main rotor is now creating vertical lift, and we can use all of that lift instead of having some of it sent back in a rearward vector. And that'll help also build up the speed of the main rotor, which increases the efficiency of the main rotor and give us a better chance of flying this out before we split the skids. Now, whoever does the go-around, whoever does either the go-around or brings the engine in, as we get these dropouts, the urgency can really make the student or the instructor kind of tense up a little bit, and I understand completely why. And what we need to make sure is that as we bring that throttle on, we have some technique, and we say crack to 80, governess got it, loose grip. We kind of use those verbiage to kind of make sure that we progress through a normal roll-on without bringing the throttle all the way on. And I know there's other techniques of just using the correlator, but that doesn't work for us at high DA. But what we want to make sure is that we don't get someone roll on and while the collective's still low, and then pull a bunch of collective, because we're going to get an overspeed, a correlator overspeed, which are very hard to stop as the instructor if the student isn't letting go of the throttle. And we've had instructors correlate overspeed themselves in these kind of urgent last-minute go-arounds. And a quick plug for the dangerous student error series that I did. I sort of love this. Excuse me. Drink for 1 second. Right. I'm a pretty strong believer in instructors demonstrating the first auto rotation of the flight. Now, for a few reasons. One, to verify the conditions. Is it a good idea to do it today? To be able to predict how and when to intervene, how fast is RPM building, etc., and to maintain their own instructor proficiency, not only to be able to teach effectively, but also intervene effectively. And if stuff hits the fan, how good are you at doing autos? Now, there'll be a counter argument, be, oh, you're taking time away from the student. I disagree with that. I think getting a student watching an auto, if they're thinking about what they would be doing and they're not flying the aircraft, they are learning, or they should be, paying attention to what they feel, what they hear, paying attention with their left hand, what the collective's doing. They're going to have a better perspective on the auto than the instructor themselves. It's always the person who's not flying it can kind of see the big picture and take some of the stuff in. So I don't see it like that at all. I think it's a safe, smart thing to do, especially if you're dealing with turbulent conditions. And back to personal minimums or school minimums. So our school minimums are, or our lockout is, we won't do auto rotations above 7,000 DA. Now, I know, if you go work up in Denver, they probably have to do autos above 7,000 DA, and there's all the risk that comes with that. And I know partly why some schools will be using cadets or Raven 2s for primary training rather than R22s. Okay, so finishing up the auto rotations, operating above your out-of-ground effect limit. We talked about this at the very start. If we're aware that our out-of-ground hover performance is going to be below where we're finishing our autos, we need to be very careful that we don't try to come to a high stationary hover. Perhaps we maintain some forward movement instead of zeroing out all of the movement. And you watch out for falling through and then students pulling, or instructors or pilots just over pulling and getting low RPM, which is obviously going to increase your descent rate there. Maybe it's better just to wait for later in the flight, do some other stuff first, or work on some at altitude, similar engine failures, whatever it might be, until we get some out-of-ground effect hover performance, burning some of that fuel off. Okay, into off airports. All right, so light and variable winds again. It's never great to have a tailwind that you weren't expecting, but especially dangerous if we are operating close to our ground effect hover limits in a confined area. One of the techniques that we use is what's called a 40 and 40 wind check, where if we are really unsure where the wind is because it's light and variable, and we really want to where that headwind's coming from, if we really want to get that headwind, we will do a 40 knot one direction, say 200 feet over the spot, and then turn around and come do 40 knots, the exact same ground track, but in reverse, same altitude, same indicated airspeed. And a couple of things we're doing there is we're looking for how is the wind affecting the aircraft in terms of the apparent ground speed. And if you have a GPS or ground speed, you can compare like for like. There's one thing I would say is if you are in high DA conditions and you're coming in to do an off airport, let's say you're doing 60 knots, or let's say you're just doing 40 knots, but you're only doing it in one direction. And you look down at your ground speed on your GPS and it says 43 knots. You say, well, I must have a tailwind, surely, because I'm 40 indicated. But you have to remember that true airspeed error could be pretty big. So you may actually still have a headwind, or there may be no wind at all. But just because your indicated is always going to be less than your actual true airspeed, especially the higher DA you get. So when you get those kind of conditions and you really can't feel the wind out, do 40 knots one way, 40 knots the other way. Look for the way that the aircraft's crabbing to maintain the straight line. Look for the way the aircraft might be twitching a little bit if it's got a tailwind. Feel for how much response you get from forward cyclic. If it feels like you have to really dive to get the airspeed back, you probably have a tailwind, and you compare the other way and you push forward and the aircraft responds more quickly and the apparent ground speed's slower. So you can use this technique to pretty much get a a 90-degree quadrant of a wind direction in 2 passes. Also, making a dummy run if needed. If that's not practical, when you don't want to do that, think about, well, let's just make a dummy run, and we'll not commit to going below 30 knots, and we won't commit to going below whatever altitude makes sense to then climb out. Because obviously, some of this stuff won't work in both directions because of the way the terrain goes. One thing we always preach to our students is slow down and power up early. That allows you to detect wind and power requirements when you are high enough to go around. If you drive this thing in above ETL all the way to the ground, now that is a technique, but if you drive all the way in above ETL to the ground and then try and stop it at the end and you don't have the performance you think, that's when we end up rolling helicopters over. It's a bad time to find out that you're going to overpull and get low RPM because you just can't stop the descent. So find out early and then be slow and boring and predictable, walk it in these kind of confined areas. Now, depending on how big the confined area is, depends on how much that is necessary, but always be ready for a go around. And remember those 30 knot checks that we sort of talked about earlier on. Another technique, talking about techniques, is one of the tools you can use as you start to work out whether it's good to proceed lower and further into this off airport is some sort of hover check, out of ground hover check. If you do, one of the tools we talk about is a 500-foot out of ground hover check. The idea is that if I can maintain altitude stabilized hover above the spot, it'll give me a rough idea, that I can proceed further on. Now, if I can't maintain a 500-foot out of ground foot hover, I shouldn't go any further because the likelihood is I won't be able to. I would caution you though with this technique is just because you can maintain a 500-foot out of ground hover check does not mean that you'll be able to do it when you actually get down in there. There's quite a few variables, like is the aircraft slightly drifting? Are you getting some sort of translational lift over the main rotor? Are wind strength stronger up there than down there? I've seen at least a couple of inches of difference in what I think is a maintaining a stable hover and what we actually look at when we get 10 feet above the ground. So it's just a tool, but be very careful of using this tool because if we're in high DA and or a good chance that we might end up reaching that full throttle. So we always need to use that pre-flight planning tool to work out roughly where we think that is, pay attention to it. And as the manifold pressure comes up into the yellow range, I train people that's the time to start talking out loud about what you're pulling. So I'm saying 20, 21, 22. Well, my limit today is 23 and full throttle is like 23 and a half. So if I still have 1 inch left, but I'm still moving forward and down, I should probably go around at this point. Well, back to what we're talking about though, this is our ground effect hover check. So what we watch out for is people trying to maintain that hover and getting really fixated on, say, the VSI and just keep pulling and they end up getting low RPM. Now that immediately is going to start to increase the descent. And if we don't have a plan to get out of it pretty quickly, we can get ourselves rapidly into vortex ring state because descent rate is going to increase as the RPM decays. We're already at a high power setting with a high collective setting, and we're obviously already below ETL, so it can transition into vortex ring state pretty rapidly. So always brief the recovery or abort plan. Are we going to go forward here? Are we using the Vachard or lateral to go out? Have that plan up front so when it does start to happen, you are primed to follow through. Another thing we see a fair bit out here is baked mud out in the practice area and some lava rock areas. They can create a big difference to the local temperatures, reflecting heat off those surfaces. I think the highest I saw as I came in to do a landing, and there was some lava. It wasn't even a large lava rock area. It's probably only, I don't know, about 10 feet across or something like that. But as I come in and I tried to stabilize the hover there, I'm really struggling to maintain the hover. And I looked at the outside air temperature gauge and it was reading 50 degrees centigrade. So that's obviously the bottom of the helicopter, but it's not many more inches up for where the intake of the engine is. So you're getting some seriously hot air coming into the engine there. And that's really going to mess with your performance that you were expecting. Now, I do not fixate on the outside temperature gauge as I'm coming into land. Of course, there's more important things to be looking at, but certainly with these type of surfaces, consider that when you're doing your recon in those high temperature days and you're talking about the surface. It's not just about brownouts, it's all sorts of things. Fire risk. So, yeah, we live in an area where there's a lot of wildfires through the season. We do not want to be part of that problem. So use caution whenever operating over dry grass and vegetation. The Safety Note 17 talks about, doesn't talk about much, but it just says, be very careful whoever landing in grass. And there was an R-22 that landed in dry grass. I'm just going to guess, might be Australia, but I don't know. And they end up with this fire that ends up consuming and destroying the aircraft. But yeah, I mean, for check rides, if you're saying, well, I need to touch down the skids because it's an off-airport assignment on a check ride, if you look in the ACS, there's no requirement to touch skids down. It does not have to terminate to skids down. It can be a hover or skids down. So as we go into fire season, we advise our instructors and students not to put skids down over vegetation. Which leads people to, well, I'll land on the track then. We'll get to that in a second, the downside to that. Another thing I always teach is when you have landed or hovered in an off-airport and you take off, just as habit, I do a downwind departure check of the spot. So I check the spot like a little bit of a traffic pattern. I take off, I get to at least 300 feet or whatever I can, and I turn. And then on the downwind, I do a cockpit check, lights out, top of the green, all that good stuff. And I also look at the spot to make sure I didn't start a little wildfire down there. That's a good technique, though, because you don't want to ignore those gauges and then 10 minutes later look down and see that you've got a real problem with the oil pressure, and now you're over 100-foot trees. You had a perfect good landing spot back there, so try to get in the habit of checking that on your downwind departure from an off-airport. Fuel quantity, carb heat, all that good stuff, and whether you started a fire or not. Talking about brownouts. So this is a shout out to Clay. I think he's on here. So this is one of his videos on his Instagram, and I'll put the link in there. But yeah, brownouts. First of all, I'll be clear. I'm not going to teach you brownout techniques on a webinar. That would be really irresponsible. It is a dangerous thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about trying to avoid them. We'll talk a little bit about what happens if you get into one, but we really want to try to stay out of it. Be alert for brownout conditions over dry trails and sparse vegetation, and consider what I call a dusting run. So I have come down to land on stuff that I think would engulf us, and it turns out to be pumice stone, and it doesn't move at all. And then other times I've gone down to land on stuff that I think the vegetation's going to hold on, and it just blew the whole thing into a dust bowl. So if in doubt, do a dusting run. Just come on down ahead of any dust that's forming and do a go around. And not only do you get to see what kind of conditions you're going to encounter or a taster of it, you're doing two things there. You're also get a secondary wind indication. That big dust bowl is going to move one way or another, which is important for landing anyway, but also if you're trying to stay ahead of this, if it is kind of lighter dust, you just don't want it in the cockpit. And if it is light dust on a surface of road, you may have actually just taken most of it off too. Always start a go around early. If visibility starts deteriorating, just don't let it engulf you. Once you lose visibility, low level, statistically, it's not going to go very well, especially if you haven't had training on this in an aircraft. Even those that do have training end up balling these aircraft up, even though when they've got all sorts of extra technology and all the experience they have, it is a pretty dangerous thing. Once you lose reference for whatever reason, you lose situational awareness, spatial disorientation, and you have no buffer. You're right there. Dynamic rollover is just a couple of feet away. Now, if you do end up coming in and you unexpectedly get a brownout forming or whiteout, and you are unable to go around, if you are forced to land, some basic techniques is obviously keep moving forward if you can. Don't try to bring it to a stabilized hover before touchdown if you can. If you can, try to have something solid on the ground. So whether that's a rock or a reasonable bush or something, and put it as close as you can to the canopy so that you can maintain reference on that as everything else kind of disappears, including the horizon. And then try to work out how you're going to get out of there too. It's not just a safety concern, it's also a maintenance risk, because we operate in a pretty dusty environment out in our East practice area, and it really plays havoc with our air filters, our oil cooler radiators, even the rotor heads. So, the dust out here is lava dust. It's pretty abrasive, and it gets into all the bearings and the bushings and stuff in the rotor head, and can start causing the rotor head bushings to stick, and that starts translating to the cyclic kind of sticking as it comes around, and it's a pain for maintenance as well. Just a couple of more maneuvers, and then we're kind of finishing up, really. Governor off with low RPM. If you're operating in thermals and convective stuff and gusty winds, obviously we're going to get RPM surges and decay in those thermals. So making sure you're feeding that out, but reducing speed will also reduce or minimize the RPM fluctuations. So trying to do it at 60 instead of 70 or 80, especially as true airspeed is also higher. And consider whether the training is appropriate for the conditions. This is probably one of the first things we stop doing when the thermals are really bad. Is, all right, let's not do governor off in the R22 right now. The conditions are really not conducive to safely doing this. Other maneuvers, just going back to this not having hover out ground effect performance and watching out for low RPM and settling into vortex ring state, particularly in things like steep approaches, if you get too slow and you don't have our ground effect performance, or quick stops, where you might normally come to an almost standstill without out of ground effect hover performance. You really want to modify that to being moving forward. Or if you're trying to do a vortex ring state setup and you don't have performance to come to a hover, and you're going to come into a high power, low airspeed, and you're going to kind of get yourself into it a lot quicker than you expect. Or those with a high flare, so the student's still gauging out the flare height, and you end up with these high termination of a flare, again, level before you bleed out all the airspeed, and just kind of move it forward, keep some rotor efficiency there so you don't expose yourself to an out of ground effect hover you don't have performance for. Thermals generally, right? So, you're starting to feel the aircraft move around, probably thinking about maybe slowing down a little bit. When was the last time you did low G recovery flight training? And maybe you didn't, and I highly suggest you do. We'll see if we can watch this video real quick. This is back from, actually, probably about 10 years ago. Let me just show you real quick and I'll explain what's going on here. So we are simulating a roll through low G, not getting into low G, but we're simulating a roll. And so we kind of pair the whole thing with, try to build that whole sensation. So we say to the student, and we train them on this first. We don't just unannounced and go do this, but we train them and say, hey, imagine you get light on the seat and you get this uncommanded right roll. Now, of course, with the new stabilizer, we'll do it left or right, but in the traditional version of the stabilizer on the right side, we say, imagine you get light in the seat and then suddenly you get this right roll. And the instructor will add right cyclic. And they'll point out, of course, the cyclic won't move when this really happens, but we build this a physical sensation of this uncommanded right roll, and make sure that the student doesn't fight the cyclic back to the left, that they follow through on their training, gentle aft. You don't have to feel heavy in the seat, we just have to feel in our seat. If we feel really heavy, there's a good chance we're going to kind of build the RPMs up. We don't want to do that. We just want to gentle aft. And then most of the time, the R22 and the 44 kind of sorts itself out. But if it doesn't, you can add a little bit of left or right to get back on track. And, making sure you're doing that training. I think when the SFAR 73 was changed, 2024, I think, and they said they took out the whole bit about the low G flight training, and rightly so, because we shouldn't do low G. I think they missed an opportunity there. They could have said, let's get the instructor to give an uncommanded roll and get the in flight and get the student to react appropriately and call it low G recovery flight training, with the emphasis being on the recovery part, not the low G piece. But that's my 2 cents there. So there's a link to that video too. And then now we'll just get to the cool down and post flight. So I try to park the aircraft away from the sun if it's safe to do so with the wind. We used to have this guy, we used to call him Mr. Sunshine, and he just was oblivious to it. He'd always park the helicopter into the sun, and I'd be the next one going out. Cool downs are going to take longer, but don't cut them short. We really want to get to that minimum of 300 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it does stabilize out at. It may not get down there in super hot days, but we want to do that to avoid oil coking. Oil coking leads to stuck valves, and stuck valves lead to partial power failures. And we want to stay away from that, or complete power failures if it impacts the piston. Make sure we clean the windscreens, be a good user of the aircraft, make sure we're set up for the next person, allow time between flights, especially as a busy instructor, to rehydrate, get out of that heat, get out of the wildfire smoke, and assess your fatigue levels. Again, this summer fatigue is real. And on the plus side, log that high DA time. Anytime you're operating takeoff and landings above 5,000 feet DA, make sure you log in that time, or maneuvers above 5,000, low-level maneuvers above 5,000 DA. That is sought after by many employers and contracts in U.S. Forest Service, Papillon, or Utility and Fire, all sorts. So if you do get up there, at least make sure you're logging that, and make sure that's in your resume when you apply for your next job. All these links, I'm going to post these into the chat in a second. And also I will post a quick link to the survey where you can just give me a little bit of feedback, but also more importantly, probably, is where you can get your FAA wings credit. And I think that is it. I'll open up to questions and discussion, and back to the MC, John.
Outstanding. That was super thorough, and really enjoyed it. Thank you. That was great.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. I'll go first, and if anybody else has anything they want to add, please by all means jump in. One thing I'd like to comment: when I was first starting my training, I watched almost all of your helicopter flight training videos with the one student who you basically started with him in the beginning and went all the way through. And
Yeah.
I watched almost all of those at one point or another. One that, and I would encourage actually new students to do that. Just just sit down and have those going, even if you're not necessarily, even if you're just driving and kind of listening to them. But having those training videos on, watching them certainly are helpful. But it gets you ready for what you're about to be learning and doing. So they're super, super helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. But anyway, one of those videos in particular, you guys were at an off airport on a Pinnacle, and you had talked about not setting down because for concern of starting a fire. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, I didn't even think of that as being a potential problem. And like, I was thinking about all the things that I have to learn and then adding that on top of it. But that one really stuck with me, that you can set the helicopter down and torch off something. Okay, so I want to really talk about entries in auto rotations and high DAs. And so we're taught here at altitude, right now it's 73, or it's 23 degrees Celsius, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. And our DIA, for example, is at 5,400 MSL, but our DA right now is at 7,800, and that's pretty typical, right? So we have high DAs on the regular. We do not fly 22s up here. I know people have in the past. That's something I want to talk to you about a little bit later, but not in the video. But anyway, so when we're trained up here to enter auto rotations, because the POH says above 4,000, be slow to respond on the collective to prevent potential overspeeds. So up here we will roll off and lower at the same time.
Yeah.
And the reason we do that is to take the pitch out of the to take the power out of the rotor, the RPM, and instead of just slamming it down and taking all that pitch out and leaving that, allowing for a potential quick overspeed. Now that's primarily a high DA technique. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think there's reference to it in the POH as well. I think they sort of talk about auto entries above, I can't remember what the DA is, or the altitude, to roll down slightly before. We haven't found that to be a problem where we're at. And I think it depends on the speed of lowering the collective. Right now, we train when we're learning autos to keep it pretty slow. So our pace is all the way down, roll off, and catch. And when you think, oh, hang on, but if we're going all the way down, why are we waiting so long to roll off? But you got to remember the correlation is closing the throttle as well.
Yeah.
So as long as you keep going down, you are closing the throttle. But if you are really slow, really, really slow, I can certainly see how absolutely would definitely the engine and rotor would start coming up. We sort of see it when people make not so much auto entries, but when they make pretty aggressive descents, and certainly when they're getting into the R44 and they can't get this thing to come down, it's just floating and floating, and they keep lowering and they keep lowering, and they get down to about 10 inches of manifold pressure on the 44 or even 2, and now the engine and rotor is right up there. So I can see, if you are too slow. But yeah, I know we've never used that technique or had to use that technique. We've never had, again, touch wood, we've never had an overspeed on entry due to not rolling down
Mm,
uh, on entry. But I certainly know that's a technique.
yeah. Yeah, I just found that interesting that entry that technique up here is just roll off and lower right around the same time. We generally run Raven twos. Um,
And I think mechanics of it would work pretty well too. You sort of like you're
mm-hmm.
lowering and twisting close at the same time, and you probably end
Yeah,
up coming close throttle about the time that you get all the way down.
yeah.
By the time you've gone close to the bottom, you're already transitioning into the airflow of the rotation anyway.
I know.
Yeah,
I certainly early on it kind of dumped the collective kind of quickly, and you get light in your seat if you do that. I mean those
yeah.
are things that just kind of learning curve type stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. I have some other questions, but let's open it up. See who else has anything else they'd like to add or questions in particular.
Hey,
Yeah.
um, yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. And also want to chip in about those helicopter videos that you made. Did watch them before starting my training 2 years ago. I definitely think it made a huge difference.
Glad
Just
to help.
yeah, I feel like you start that helicopter, right, or that first flight that you do, and if you don't have anyone or you don't see those videos of how gentle everything is, that made a huge difference in hovering and whatnot. Uh, but yeah, something that I really took as interesting in this last presentation that you just did also is the importance of IDA and how it affects true airspeed. I feel like that is something that we don't get taught much. We kind of go a little bit goes overseen. I guess in like we don't really speak much of it. But yeah, even in your calculations of your cross country flights, if you're going somewhere, well, that's V&E, right? Really something that we don't speak much about. So yeah, that was like a eye opener for me. It's like, oh, wait a minute, that's actually a big difference when you get up into those temperatures. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah, and I think it wouldn't, if you live somewhere like Florida where the temperatures are more sort of consistent, it probably wouldn't really occur or matter. With the big temperature swings that we get here in Oregon or in Bend, Oregon, and that on top of the elevation, all the little tips and tricks we can to try and avoid these overspeeds.
Yeah, I feel like especially we train in the same spot, right? Or many of us train in the same spot, and then we go work somewhere completely different. So that those rules of what we learn, right? That primacy of what things that we see and the things that we learn, if we don't learn those different aspects, yeah, just I keep getting surprised about all the new different aspects. Awesome.
Well, I don't know how long you've been flying, but I've been flying for about 16 years, and I am still being surprised and finding out great new things. I don't know if this ever ends. So
I love that about aviation. Honestly, that's one of the things that we, I mean, as I'm progressing through, that's one of the things I'm finding I like the most is that we're always humbled by it and we're always learning.
there's always something new.
Yeah.
And there's always someone who's enthusiastic to tell you about it too. I mean, you don't get many pilots who I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't.
Yeah. Right.
Not many.
Right.
Maybe Clay's come across a few in the Sky Crane. We get Grumpy Captain or something, but I don't know.
Grumpy Sky Crane Captain. That's funny.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's me someday. We'll see. How about anybody else? Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? If you guys want to think about it, feel free to jump in. I have a few things I'd like to discuss. So the windscreen cleaning technique. This is a hotly debated topic, I know. My G taught us that his preferred method, maybe you can verify this, is take a spray bottle with water, mist the windscreen, let it sit for a minute, mist it again, and then use the palm of your hand to kind of wipe the screen and do that until you get those bugs off, and then use the microfiber cloth and just kind of run it straight down gently. But you don't need to really put a lot of effort or a lot of pressure on. What are your thoughts on that technique?
Well, so they've got two types of windscreens up there, right? So they've got the
Yeah.
crash-resistant windscreen, which
Yeah.
I think is much more unforgiving if they get scratches in it, from my understanding. But all the places I've ever worked, it was either water first, like when I was working at Papillon,
Yeah.
it was water first. You'd spray it off just to get any dust particles off, because otherwise it would kind of get on the.
Yeah.
And then after that, you'd go in usually with some sort of cleaning spray. Like we had, what is it called? Prex? I can't remember the name of the spray, but I see that a fair bit. It's aviation grade cleaning stuff.
Yeah.
When I go up, and then you'd use disposable fiber cloth. Those microfibers, we've had some serious problems with those, because what happens is people will use them for something else, like an oil, or they drop them on the floor and they pick up a piece of debris, and we've had windshields scratched or covered in oil. So we always have white cotton rags for oil and disposable paper rags for windshields, and that's kind of kept us from scratching up our windshields. And we'll always, like, in the morning we'll restock at least 6. That's usually enough for the day. And we don't have the water out, but we just lava this thing up with the spray, let it absorb in, and then it comes off, and we get most of the bugs off on the first run. I remember working for Temsco, and they would part of your post-flight duties, no matter how tired you were, how much you wanted to go and have a beer, everyone was going to clean those helicopters before everyone was released. And you're all there with brushes, and you're cleaning the dust off, the carbon off the tail, and someone else is doing the windshields. We didn't have bugs so much then, but cleaning windshields is just part of the job for many places. I remember maybe one place where I landed and someone would come and clean my windshield for me. That was pretty rare.
Yeah, those bugs in the summertime, man, they can be brutal. Yeah, do you guys ever see Me, Myself, and Irene when he eats the big June bug when he's riding on the motor? That's so funny. That's such a good movie. So I'm going to keep going unless anybody else has anything. You had mentioned in the Raven 2 not to crack the throttle when you fire it up to try to give it a little extra fuel, because that'll immediately, inevitably lead to an overspeed.
Before engaging the starter.
Right.
Before engaging the starter.
Before engaging the starter. Okay. So on the carbureted versions, at times we'll give it a little bit of fuel, right, in the throttle to kind of.
Are you talking about, would you pump the fuel and then go back to idle before you start it, or are you talking about while starting and you crack it open a little bit while starting?
Yeah, while starting, crack it open a little bit while starting, and that's idea. That's obviously something we don't want to do, but occasionally we do. And are you saying that in the Raven 2, if you do that, you're going to inevitably have an overspeed immediately?
Yeah. I mean, it's happened. I've witnessed to at least a couple. It is so much power and no load on it. And it just, wow, up it goes. And I think even 22, there's a risk of that too. But I think the 44 is where we've spun. It's come up so fast. And even if it didn't go through the red line, it left the squirrel cage behind and offset the squirrel cage. Yeah. The engine kind of twisted so quickly,
Yeah. I have yet to.
Raven 2. You fine?
What's that? Say that again. You're muted, Jay. I muted you.
I can hear.
I can unmute you.
I can hear you, Jay.
Hold on.
Yeah, even the Raven 1 will do that. Like, that happened to me at Myrtle Beach. We had a hard starter, and I just kept cracking and cracking, because that's how we kind of used to get them started in flight school. And there wasn't much damage, but the mechanic definitely knew that it was an overspeed, and I got to ride the golf cart for a whole week, and it was not fun. So,
lesson learned. I've yet to see a squirrel cage nut off center or out of line. I do believe you have one on found on Preflight. I've been promoting that website. I'm in a fixed wing study group too, and I've actually been flying airplanes recently. You guys don't hold it against me.
Oh, John, you let us down.
I know.
Come on, don't.
I know.
Don't.
I don't like it more. I'm just making that clear. I don't like it more. But
Yes, don't go into the dark
I'm
side
not.
per
I'm
se.
not.
You know.
But it's fun landing them. Actually, I don't know if you guys have any landings.
Yeah,
and-
landing's
That's fun.
fun.
Yeah, it's pretty
That's
fun.
the fun.
I'm like, I
Yeah.
just want to go in the pattern and do a bunch of landings, man. That's really what I've been doing. Um, but I'm
Well,
gonna
thank you
do.
for promoting that, and yeah, thank you for promoting that, and
Yeah.
the more people that can get stuff put on there of what they're finding, and because
Yeah.
I get stuff from places that are different environments. So I got one where they're working in a sort of close to the coast, and they're getting a lot of sea corrosion, seawater corrosion type stuff that we just don't see in the high desert. So yeah, all that stuff's going to help everyone. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I thought I had one to post, but it was just the weight balance on the balance weights on the rotor clamp. There's some weights on the end that can be adjusted or not be there at all, and they have nothing to do with holding the.
Yeah.
And I was like, "There's nothing on there. I found something," and I was all excited, but it had nothing. Yeah, it was totally.
I
Still
know exactly the piece you're talking about. It
Yeah.
offsets the scissor or something. I can't remember. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and that's just a balance thing. But what else do I have in my notes? Anybody else have anything? I have. Oh, hovering while hot. Hovering
Yeah.
while hot. Yeah. So we were. There was times that a couple. I guess it was last summer. After I had my PPL, I went up and just wanted to do some hover work. And we had a hot day. It was probably 30 or more high. It's high and hot up here, right? And me and the instructor, we were just really conscious of our oil temperature when we were hovering, and it got really hot, at one point, and not concerning, but it had climbed up there quite a bit. So I just set it down for a little while, and I was really surprised at how quickly setting it down, or how quickly that oil temperature recovered after just setting it down and not pulling
Is
so
that
much.
Raven?
Huh? Yeah.
R44.
Yeah, it was in a 44. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was just something I had, we were conscious of and we had thought about the whole time, but it was interesting to see it actually happen. So yeah, a lot of hover work while hot. Does that happen to you guys up there in the 22? I imagine you're not doing a lot of hover work at high DA days.
No, I think when we, every summer we'll sort of see an aircraft that's being trending it because it's running hot.
Yeah.
And this is usually what they find, back to the dust, right? So the oil cooler radiator, when you put that little inspection hatch up to check that there's no bird's nest in there.
Yeah.
It's more than that. If it's baked in there with dust, it's not doing a great job of letting the airflow go through, so the oil's not cooling. So that's one of the first things they'll do is they'll get compressed air and they'll clean that out. And then this sheet metal that's all around the engine to keep the cooling area, and that's just chintzy crap. There's all sorts of cracks and breaks, and so that will be another thing that's going to add to the temperatures. But and then they can also mess around with the pressure relief valve, and they can kind of change the oil pressure, which is pressure and temperature related. So they can do a little bit of tweaking with that. But it's not normally that we're doing anything in particular. It's just that the aircraft, it's high power settings, of course, but that could be on a pattern. Every time we're going around, we're climbing back out, trying to get this thing back up, and on the downwind, do a downwind check. Oh shit, it's up there again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that oil cooler, it just always accumulates something. But how often, are those really, and what's the best way to clean those out? Just to blow it out or vacuum it out, I think, right? Vacuum generally?
I think what they're using is they're using shop compressed air, and they're blowing it down through or up through. I don't know which way they're doing it, but
the louvers.
They're using like a compressed air nozzle, and they're just kind of string it down through the vents and clearing it out. I think that's how they're doing it, or up the other way. I haven't watched them do it, but that's what they told me.
I've never really seen one, especially in hot, dry, grassy places that doesn't have stuff in it. They always have something in it. Anybody else have anything they want to say? Any comments, questions?
Well, I got to show you something real quick, John. Let's see.
What do you got?
All right. Let's see the outside there. Can y'all see that out there?
You're out west.
Yeah.
You're not in Florida.
I'm I'm not. I'm at helicopter summer camp. I'm up in Mons on the S55.
Oh,
Trying cherries.
cherries, yeah.
Oh, you are lucky. That's
My
awesome.
my hand is getting strong.
Yeah,
No governor.
yeah, that's awesome.
You're
Is it
flying
the
a
piston
S?
version or is it the turboprop version or the turbo
The
version?
radio, the big radials, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get some turbine, but they're like, nope, that's not gonna happen. Come on.
Wait, what are you
Need some
flying?
turbine.
The S-55?
The
Sikorsky?
S-55
The
Chickasaw. Old 70-year-old aircraft.
damn.
Hey, Jay, how did they train you? Because I know one of the companies will take you up in an Enstrom for training because it's manual throttle. I know one of the companies that does that for 55s.
No,
Put you in.
he puts you right on the 55, you know.
That is awesome.
And obviously you got a chairman flying with you. But I got my intro, and then today I was paired up with somebody, so I was on the left seat. But it was still pretty cool, you know, just flying the rows, and you know, it's pretty amazing to be in a big classic ship like that. So
A nose-mounted
Yeah.
radial engine? That's insane.
yeah, nose mounted radio engine. It starts right, and it doesn't go in straight to rotor engagement, so you can run the engine without engaging the rotor, and that's still blowing my mind. So because I'm like, normally most of the time you start the engine, you know that rotor is running. No, we can start that engine and not ever release the rotor brake, so therefore the rotor does not run, and it's totally fine, you know.
What year
So-
is the one you're flying?
What probably 50 something, 58s, you know,
Wow.
like 60s. It's just really, really ancient, but fun, loud, you know.
But you'll find some bullet holes from Vietnam somewhere in there if you look far enough. But
You guys
Yeah.
you need a climbing harness and a helmet to get into those things, right? You got to go up way
I
up over the
know
top of the
that
engine.
I was trying to get used to it. Yeah, like the climb is really. I'm like I got on a few times and I was like, this is not a Cabri, you know, like the
Man,
old bait and switch. But yeah,
how cool.
definitely it's fun. Definitely fun. Jay, I ran into Cy. He was on his
Cy
way to yeah. So, I was like, we're sitting at SeaTac, and I said your name. He's like, come over here. How do you know Jay? I was like, we're in a little group, you know.
That's cool.
So yeah, small world.
The world is a small world. Like we talk about, I think it's 3 degrees of separation. Like you can find someone who knows someone in about 3 degrees for helicopter operations.
Yeah, pretty
That's
much.
Man, that's great, Jay. That's cool. Great gig. You have to send us some videos of
Yeah.
that thing.
Good experience.
I'd love to see that thing in action.
You might find a few
Oh,
things
for
on
sure.
found. You might find a few things that you might think be found on pre-flight, and they're like, no, that's normal. That's normal. That amount of oil, that is normal. I assure you.
Yeah, for sure. They do leak a lot of oil, but you know,
Oh, I believe it.
they're 70 years old.
I bet there's not that many flying.
But-
I wonder how many are really out there still.
No, I these might be the only people, and I'm thinking maybe in like 10 years, this is not going to be an opportunity to be had. So I figured for the story value, I was like, I got to do it.
Yes.
I just got to do it.
Man, I would pay to come to do that. I'm sure you're getting paid, but I would pay to come do that. That looks
Yeah.
awesome, man.
Are you in Washington? What state are you in, Jay?
Yeah, I'm in Washington. I'm in
Yeah.
close to Brewster. It's Golden Wings.
Yeah, there's a couple of 55 operators up in Washington, and they probably between them own the whole fleet of what's left.
Wow.
I think they're all doing
Yeah.
cherries.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Fun.
So they're really effective, I guess, at blowing water off cherries, huh?
Yeah, that rotor's huge.
Yeah.
So it works really great.
And you're using 100 low lead?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. except
They're
for
chucking coal
obviously.
into a furnace. There's like some little kid down there just putting coal into the furnace.
There's a fireman.
Yeah, there's a little tiny man down there just putting
It's
coal
steam.
and
It's steam engine.
keeping it going. But no, they got a few turbine versions which look cool.
Yeah,
And like I
sweet.
said, I keep asking. Either I'm gonna wear them down or they're just gonna kick my ass out. And if they do, I'll go down your way, Jay. Come see.
Yeah, please come see us.
I'm not that far now.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
one state away.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That was awesome. Anybody have any more questions for Jay? Clay, I see you jumped on. Anything you want to add?
Yeah,
to that?
hey.
How's it going,
I don't know
brother?
if I can share. Got a couple photos. Does this show up on your screen?
Yep. Try to no. So you're doing the it's doing that like shadow thing. So in the lower right corner, hit that pop out button.
Lower right corner.
Yeah, let me get you out
we go.
of here. Hold on, let me get that off.
I see your stream, Clay.
Is that you, Clay? There you go. Are you sharing your screen?
Yes. Does it show? I don't know how it works.
So in the lower left corner, you can hit share screen, and then lower right corner, there's a little pop out button.
So click the pop out.
Okay, and then maybe. Okay.
In the main screen, I think the main screen there's a little share icon bottom left, Clay. It looks like a screen with an arrow pointing to the right.
Right.
Hold on. Let's see if I can figure this out.
There you go. Close that pop out and then try it in the low video connection, helicopter pilot study group. There's some icons where you can turn your camera on and off, and then there's a little share screen button.
Okay. So share screen. Allow to share screen. Your entire.
Nice. Sounded good.
Does this show a? Is this working?
All right, I'm gonna click on watch stream, and we've got it.
Get some graphs.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So one thing, when Jay, you were talking about the safety nose for the tall grass. So this photo was from Texas when I flew down there. And you can see the rice fields back here that we would fly, but this is where I would land quite often to refuel. And you can see that even in non-tall grass, the exhaust will burn the grass pretty decently. So both in these two spots, you can see it in this. And this was only from sitting there on the ground for maybe 2 minutes max.
Wow.
So any longer than that, this would really, I think, have the potential to start a fire. So
especially if it wasn't green grass, if it was kind of like high desert.
Yeah. So I thought it was a really nice green area to land in. So this was day one here on the left, and then day two on the right. So it does not take much, it seems, to turn that brown.
Well, we're sending you a bill for returfing their grass. Huh?
Yeah. Another thing is when we talked about the doors off and anything coming out the windscreen or out the doors. I'm often thinking about things like knee boards and things like that, but also there's so many things that are suction cup mounted these days that are really prone to failure, especially if you're going to varying altitudes. And so, whether it's an iPad on a suction mount or Sentry on a suction mount, just if you can find a way to tether that. So this I dual tethered with a coil cable and then a single cable that runs through the middle. And both of these are actually going to where the door pins are, the little slot for that. I actually has one of these on the other end. I ran that through there. So if it did come off, it's not going to go into the tail rotor or anything like that.
Can you go back to the other picture real quick? Just before you go back. Is that a company GPS in the middle? No, the aircraft. Is that a company GPS for your
this
for
one
the
right here?
Is that mounted into the frame, or how is that mounted?
Yes. Yeah, on the back side of it, it's got a little metal clip that goes right onto either side of this centerpiece on the windscreen. So it's fully bolted on there, so that one won't come off at all. Let's see. So this photo is of a clean, nice rotor blade. But one thing in the summer, especially down there in the south, is bugs.
Oh,
So this is
yeah.
what it looks
Yeah.
like after. That's about 2 days of flying, and
Wow.
of only doing about 3 hours a day. So about 6 hours later, there's a pretty significant difference between the clean rotor blade and hitting a lot of bugs. And what I found is the manifold pressure difference on this is actually fairly
inches?
noticeable. It's between
Yeah.
1 and 1.5 inches
Mm.
of what I would typically pull as I'm going through the field versus when it's
Yeah.
like this and it's that much higher. And it cleans off really easily, but really disrupts the airflow and causes a decrease in lift. So something to think about with the blade cleanliness.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
And then the last thing was we talked about the TFRs for fires, and normally I'm thinking about where the TFR actually is and trying to avoid that in the aircraft. But this is where we're flying the Sky Crane down in New Mexico on the Seven Cabins fire, Sierra Blanca, and so the actual fires about 7 to 12 miles to the northeast there. But what they started to enact is this temporary aircraft control tower. So they'll bring in a gooseneck trailer with a full mobile ATC center. And you wouldn't know anything of it unless you look at the NOTAM. Now, they are monitoring the CTAF, and so if you called over on there, they'd let you know that, hey, we do have a tower going on. But instead of I would have thought that they'd use the typical CTAF frequency, but they actually just create a new frequency for tower and for ground control. So something to think about for the airports nearby a fire TFR rather than just the TFR itself.
Clay, I assume that the airspace doesn't change designation. It's just that they have a tower within the
Correct.
Gulf or, yeah.
Yep.
So does that mean that the control tower is advisory rather than controlling?
Correct. Yep. They're not they even mentioned this, that they wouldn't, try to pursue any certificate action or anything like that if you didn't contact them, which is why they're monitoring the CTAF as well. And so they'll just let you know that, hey, it is in effect. And, weather minimums also aren't changing. Airspace type isn't changing. They're just adding that in as just because there's a, higher frequency of aircraft. And most of the time we're not departing in a standard route, especially if we have a long line or a tank. We're usually doing, like a button hook turn directly over the runways. So, yeah.
It all makes sense. Do you know what the threshold is for how many aircraft or how many operations when they have to start bringing their tower in?
They didn't say it. It almost seems more just like if, early season, they'll bring it on more preemptively just because the tower, I think, it's all contracting they already pay for the season. Later on in the season, whenever they're starting to get used more, you'll have an airport that's got twice the amount of traffic that we do at this one now, and they won't have a tower at all. So it just seems based upon staffing, but it's usually more of a campaign fire, rather than just like a small initial attack where a small TFR comes up, a couple of days of firefighting, and then it goes away. So this one, we'd already been on that one for about a week before they brought in the tower, and so that fire I think is now up to almost 30,000 acres. So it would definitely not be a small one by any means. It would have to be some campaign fire with, I think we had 4 aircraft when they brought it on, and then that quickly grew to 8 or 9.
Is it a federal tower or is it an agency for is it a state agency or whose tower is it?
I didn't get the name off the side, but I'm pretty sure it's a private company. It's a retired air traffic controller that has his own trailer with in the back of the fifth wheel. It's got a pop-up roof, and he's got tinted windows all the way around. But he's retired ATC, and so I think he has his own quote-unquote business for it, and then he just gets contracted by the Forest Service to come in and do that.
Okay, still making bank every summer. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yep.
Nice.
Making quite a bit, even when there's no aircraft, because he's operating from typically 10 a.m. till about 8 p.m. So there wasn't that much traffic anyways, because what's often happens is when that we get this campaign fire, all the private aircraft, they vanish because they don't want to deal with that, and so really at the end of the day he just ends up moving us around rather than dealing with other aircraft.
Yeah, that's where the money's made on the contract work on the fire side for sure.
Yeah.
Bill the U.S. government. So it's not an ICAO thing. There's no echo to the ground, or it's just kind of a I don't know, just
I'd almost consider it kind of like a Tersa, of sorts. Nothing's required, but it's you can use it if it's there.
it's a goodwill
So,
thing service. It's
Yeah.
not a requirement. Got it.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah, they'll just come over and just tell you, tower's in effect, and then clear you wherever you're going. But yeah, there won't be anything more than that.
Have you ever heard anybody say,
That's neat.
I'm not talking to that guy?
There's a lot of the older folks, especially since the radio's not required there to begin with,
Right.
and then they'll just go ahead and do their thing
Yeah.
and never use a radio to begin with. So
Right.
at that point, the tower will just let everyone know on frequency that there's an aircraft, that they're
Sure.
doing this, and he's not talking to them.
Got it. That's really cool, though. Yeah, thanks for sharing that stuff. That was insightful.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think it was an outstanding study group. You guys, we had a big turnout today. Really good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna open
Hey,
it up again.
are we getting credit for this? I saw.
There's a Wings
Yeah,
credit.
so
Yeah, in the chat.
I
Jay.
I put that link in the chat. Let me put it in there one more time. Make sure everyone's got it. And even if you're not putting Wings credit, if you're interested in just giving us some feedback, that would be awesome. One of the questions is, what would you want to see different subjects in webinars and things like that. If you guys can fill that out. Thanks again to everyone in the group for hosting this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you brought a lot of
Hey,
people.
can you approve me for that that last one too? I'm sure you renewed your.
I did renew my stuff. So if you send me a reminder, because I won't remember tonight. I'm having a few beers. I won't remember.
No, that's all right. I've been trying to get my local guy, and he's just like, I'm working, blah blah blah, and so I'm like, I give credit to everybody, but I can't give myself credit. So
yeah. Just send me a reminder. I'll get onto that.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Sorry I was late. I ran to the store and I told the guy, I was like, hey, we need to make it here. I got a group that we got to meet,
Well, thanks for prioritizing it. Yeah. Especially out there doing really cool flying.
Do you get free cherries?
Yeah, they said we're going to get free cherries. We're going to get the tour to the production line and everything. So it should be cool. I'm psyched. A couple months, I get to step away from the heat of Florida, which is getting pretty balmy down there. And then I'll pick it up with my Cabri guys,
Yeah, that's a kick-ass job. When I have the hours, I'm going to use you as a reference.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it was a great one. Thanks, everybody. Jay, thanks for bringing all the people to this one. We had a lot of new members jump on the study group. This is just growing exponentially, and it's really due to all the hard work and presentations everybody's putting in and the consistency, and I'm grateful for it. And we're learning a ton. So let's just keep up the good work, you guys. Thanks a lot. We'll see you for our helicopter pilot study group number 20 next week. I have a list of topics. I'm not exactly sure what I had yet. Well, let me see here. We were talking about maybe turbine transition presentation, and then Clay had maybe some topics he had potentially to talk about. So
I won't be able to get that turbine one done in time. I've
Okay.
got, I know I won't be able to get that one done, but
Okay.
maybe you can Clay's arm to come and do his commercial stuff.
yeah,
Clay.
if you're up for it,
Well,
Clay,
I mean,
I know
if
you're
there's
busy, but
something in particular, would be happy to share if there's something specific. Are we thinking commercial operations? Was that the idea?
I know you put a ton of work into. I don't know anyone else who knows commercial helicopter regs in terms of what you need to know for a commercial check ride. I don't know anyone knows it better. You know.
Sure. And I, honestly, each time I have that discussion with someone else about these, and I learn each and every time. So the current version I have is, I think, the most complete, the most accurate one that I've seen yet. So yeah, I could definitely put that into a PowerPoint format in some way if that would be beneficial to share sometime.
yeah, whatever format you think, and if it's is next week too early? Next Thursday or Friday?
No, next would be that'd be just fine.
Oh man, that would be awesome. Let's advertise it. Let's get it out there. I think that would be really beneficial.
Yeah, definitely.
Kick ass.
Make
If you have a preference,
and then,
Thursday or Friday, and you can just
same
text
day
me.
and time.
Yeah, Thursday or Friday, generally around the same game time, and you can text me your preferred time, and I'll get the event scheduled.
Perfect. That sounds great.
That's awesome. Well, you guys are the best. Enjoy those beers, Jay. Thanks again. See everybody on the next one.
Hey, boys. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye,
Cheers,
guys.
everyone. Bye bye.